I'm Mark Baer, and welcome back to the Your Town television program. My guest this segment is Frederick Nelson, and in one of my capacities, I'm Executive Director of the Museum of Monterey, and this spring we are going to have the Museum Cinema Nights that Fred is going to be in charge of. So let's talk movies, because after nuclear proliferation, that's...
Nuclear proliferation, it can be pretty fun. You know?
So Fred's looking very dapper for us tonight, and so let's talk about, let's first of all talk about your background and how you got into film and your local connections here.
Sure. I've been into film for as long as I can remember, since I was just a little boy. My mom used to take me to movies every weekend, you know, and so pretty early on I decided I wanted to work in film. And I was enrolled in, from the age of 10, any number of film screenwriting programs, camera working programs, New York Film Academy, CSUMB. I went to CSUMB Film School. I graduated about 3 years ago. And
you also worked with me on the 100-story project for the museum. Fred was my editor on that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I pursue local career as an independent contractor for people like you and Access Monterey Peninsula as an editor, videographer.
And and if you need a good camera person, if you need a good editor, let's do some business here before we move on.
Absolutely.
Fred can be contacted, and he does very good work, and I feel a bit of responsibility making sure you're employed. So.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay, before we came on today, we talked about the idea of seeing movies on a big screen, because God, it drives me nuts to see people watching an iPhone and looking at a movie, or I can't even imagine seeing a movie that I created and seeing it on a laptop. So, but that's me because I'm old, but I'm glad to hear from you that you believe in the big screen experience, and that's part of what's driving you.
Yeah, absolutely. As movies went to Netflix and phones and laptops and stuff, I was really surprised when I first got a hold of a phone that could watch a movie, because I was like, who would want to watch a movie on this? You can't appreciate cinematography, you can't appreciate detail, you can barely hear the audio. I think to audiences today, dialogue might not be as important, and all the movies have big flashy movements, and Iron Man, you know, you can just see him blow up everything from a mile away, so it might not matter as much for those films, but the kind of movies I'm interested in really requires some kind of detail, and at the museum you guys have a very nice system. Your projector is high definition, it gets true black, you have a Blu-ray player. We have an excellent audio system. We can show movies in spectacular presentation, and I think it creates a situation where there's also a social element. As I mentioned, I like to be a social movie watcher. That doesn't mean I like to talk during the movie, but it does mean that when you come away from a certain movie, you want to be able to talk to people about it. You want to be able to express and dissect and try and understand it more, and understand how it affected you and your friends. And so that's what the Museum Cinema Nights is all
You're
about.
such a throwback to my childhood. I didn't know, you know, that, I mean, this is the way that we approached cinema. You know, we had cinema growing up. There was movies and there was this, but we had cinema. And you seem to have a love of that. And then so the idea of bringing people in to discuss movies, and one of my fears is that a new audience doesn't know the basics. And I want to go over this director's list of people that you're influenced by, and let's go down this list.
Sure.
In fact, you can even read what's on your list there.
Absolutely. Well, when I was young, when I was about 15, is when I first, when I was early on, I was really into blockbusters and Oscar movies and stuff. But the thing that really caught my attention was Stanley Kubrick films. You know, like A Clockwork Orange really just blew my mind, and it was like, movies can be this, though? Like, you know, something that is very, it was not what it is at face value. A movie like that, you really have to cut really deep into it, and so I really started to explore movies by director, because at that point, Netflix hadn't arrived, and I was a teenager with no money, and so and no influence, nobody to guide me. So I just found movies that I liked, and then I assumed that the people who made them would make more movies that I liked. So I looked at, Stanley Kubrick and Akira Kurosawa are two of my favorite directors, and This year we hope to kind of especially open that can of worms for Akira Kurosawa, maybe dedicating an entire series on him. He's one of my favorites. Federico Fellini, David Lynch, David Cronenberg, lots of Davids. Alfred Hitchcock, you know, I'm pretty diverse interest. Louis Buñuel, really dig those surrealist guys. Some really trippy stuff.
Yeah. So this is great because again, I don't mean to chastise your generation, but I fear they don't know the icons.
Yeah, I worry about that as well. I think one of my goals with the Museum Cinema Nights, my goal is basically, and from the start, is to foster some kind of media literacy, which is to say that you know, a lot of people go to the movies and they just take it in and it is what it is. But I think that movies can be a deeper, more interactive experience than people treat them. You know, so I think the idea is to help create the kind of mentality where you're going to this movie and there's something to read into it. Like the dialogue matters now. I see so many movies with my friends and they're just doing all these other things, and then you miss what people are saying and the story arc is lost, and I feel like there's no point in watching it anymore. So I feel like by fostering media literacy, maybe we can salvage and save some of these classics.
Yes, story matters.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that, again, if I was your age, I'd be watching all the Italian neorealists because they had a camera, they went out, they had very basic things, but they went out and made these movies with very rudimentary. This is why these great movies are, is because they are very rudimentary. And now, with the technology you have, I mean, your camera is better than the camera that they were using.
Yes, that's true.
The light kits are easier. You have, if you understand cinema and if you understand writing, and you understand, and if you have passion, and if you see what there is to say, I mean, not only have something to say, but sometimes you need to see people saying things. So that you can go out, you've got the ability to go out and make these things.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of how the Museum Cinema Nights got their start with the Horror Motion Picture Conservatory.
You better explain what that is.
Michael and Brittany Buffo and local filmmakers, they have this conservatory. It's a community of young filmmakers, and they teach these kids how to make movies and everything. And it got started when Michael and I were hanging out one day, and he realized that I was pursuing this kind of film studies oriented approach to my college career, and he asked me to host these kinds of things to help give the kids that kind of foundation. And one of the major rules about these kind of movies was that we couldn't show any movies that the kids themselves couldn't, you know, reproduce. So we started with obviously you can't exactly reproduce, you know, like Rear Window, but Rear Window was the first movie we showed, and you know, that's something that somebody could do with, you know, even, you know, a cell phone camera.
You can't do it cinematically, but you can sure write it.
You can sure write it.
I mean, you can.
Tell the story.
It just goes to. I mean, people need to see what good storytelling and simplicity can do, tailored to the equipment that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, so there's a foundation of good storytelling that we look at in substance. You know, I try to find movies that, you know, I know there are similar instances of people showing older movies around the peninsula. There's the Golden State Theater, they show older movies. Cinemark has a series where they show, you know, newer kind of classic sort of things. But our approach is to look at a lot of deeper movies. They should challenge people on a surface level. It shouldn't be like you watch this and you're like, yeah, I get that. And very rarely.
Yeah, you want the conversation, you want the fight, you want the argument, the conflict, you know, and learning how to talk about a film, and learning how to deconstruct a film.
Absolutely, and it can be very challenging for people sometimes. You get a lot of people coming in who, you know, you try to engage them. It takes a few pokes to get in, depending on the movie. Certain movies are more provocative than others. I remember we watched David Cronenberg's The Fly, and that freaked people out right into a very thorough discussion, and they found themselves very surprised and interested when it became more about, you know, humanity and like feminism and motherhood and stuff, instead of, you know,
Yeah.
graphic visuals of David Cronenberg.
Yeah, it's such a strong medium, and the commercial, you're not living in you're not living in a golden age of movies. You are living in a golden age of television right now. I mean,
Yeah,
television has never been better in my life, or at least cable television, which I watch on a big screen. But I don't, network television is crap. But cable television is my rule of thumb for movies now. So they better be as good as television.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because very few are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that came up with I think Fellini's 8.5. There's a lot to say about Fellini's 8.5. It's one of my favorite movies. But somebody brought up this really interesting point that had just never occurred to me, which was like, if this movie came out today, would it make any money? And it's this really morbid kind of question.
Well, it didn't really make much money. It's not that it made money then.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it wasn't. That's not why it was made.
Yeah.
It was made to astound.
Exactly, and that was. I think my answer was I'm not sure, but here we are. We actually watched it on the 50th anniversary of its release, and I was wondering, if many of the movies today, even some of the Oscar noms, are we gonna watch those in 50 years? I'm not sure.
Well, I haven't seen anything this year that I would want to watch. I mean,
not 50 years.
I've seen very little. So
yeah,
I don't want to critique the list this year, but I haven't seen that much. It blew me away.
Yeah, me neither.
Except I've seen a lot of television that blew me away.
There's been a lot of good television that blew me away. I really like Mad Men. I think that movie is that shows has a lot of interesting content. There's a lot of character development. There's a lot of interesting things.
True Detective this week, and it's like, wow, this is really good, really creepy, really weird, great acting. But again, I just love the fact that you're seeing it in a group, so that somebody else is catching something that you're not catching, so that you have that participatory. Seeing it big, because it really matters. Why do the people make composition? They make sound design. They make movies are made for the big screen. And I'm watching this little thing, and I'm going, they spent $100 million there. You're watching this little thing, and it disappears, and you're not seeing it. Ugh.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you're texting at the same time, and you don't have the full attention that is required. And when people watch movies like that, they're going to start making movies like that.
They do make movies like that. It's horrible.
And that, so you have this other responsibility.
Yeah, I think the discussion-driven nature of the Museum Cinema Nights, it lends itself to people needing to pay attention. You're not going to be able to participate in discussion unless you're, if you're staring at your cell phone or whatever, you're going to have to, pay attention to the story. You can't watch Hour of the Wolf and then come in halfway through and you just get this movie. It's not going to happen. You're at the pay attention a little bit, and then during discussion you'll have something to say about it.
So what are some of the films that you've shown? What are some of the...
Oh, as I mentioned, we showed 8.5, and we showed Rear Window. We showed Out of the Wolf and The Fly. So that's right there. That's a very eclectic mix of films. I think that none of those, it just goes to show. We like to show movies in series because I think the context of one movie next to another movie creates, the sum. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You get to learn more if you see, one Kurosawa movie next to another Kurosawa movie. You learn more about his career. You learn more about post-war Japan. You learn more about those things, and you also learn what those individual movies have to offer. We had a very successful horror series last year and the year before, and people just love that. One of the interesting things about the horror series, we chose to, we started with Haxan, which is this 1920s documentary about witchcraft from Sweden. And one of the reasons I chose to start with that was because it kind of examines why it is we find things horrifying. Instead of just being horror, it just goes through these horrible things that happened, and it informs us going forward with these other things that we see in these other movies subsequently, what is also horrifying. Also, weirdly, our second horror series had this kind of feminist skew. So Haxan has this kind of feminist element about it also that's introduced and was carried through the rest of October in movies like Hour of the Wolf and The Birds and Kuroneko from Japan.
So anyway, just to recap here, museumofmonterey.org, and the movie nights will be listed soon as we complete our schedule and complete our dates. So keep checking the museum website. Anybody out there making a movie, please hire young Fred. I need to know that he's eating. we don't want to see him thin. He's thinned down, but we don't want to see you any thinner.
I appreciate it. I love to eat.
So anyway, my pleasure, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark.
So anyway, Fred Nelson, and you have been watching the Your Town television program. I'm Mark Baer, your host.